Hello, I'm Sebastian. Welcome to 9 Trees podcast. Today, I will summarize and review the book, Summer of Our Discontent, The Age of Certainty and the Demise of Discourse by Thomas Chatterton Williams is a non-fiction examination of how public conversation has hardened into camps that prize moral certainty over curiosity and persuasion. Known for cultural criticism that blends personal experience with reportage and analysis, Williams focuses on the social and institutional pressures that shape what people feel permitted to say, question, or even wonder about in good faith. The book frames contemporary debate as increasingly performative, driven by incentives that reward purity tests, rapid judgment, and viral outrage while punishing nuance. Across politics, media, and everyday life, it considers why disagreement now so often becomes a battle over identity and legitimacy rather than evidence and reasoning. Williams argues that discourse suffers when complexity is treated as betrayal, and he invites readers to reconsider the habits of mind that make democratic conversation possible: humility, proportionality, and an openness to revising one's views. The result is a timely exploration of how we arrived here and what it could take to talk again. I will give you key takeaways from this book. Firstly, the age of certainty and the collapse of intellectual humility. A central idea is that many modern arguments are driven less by a search for truth than by a demand for confidence. Williams examines how certainty becomes a social asset. It signals belonging, protects status, and provides simple narratives in a complex world. But when certainty is rewarded, intellectual humility can look like weakness or complicity. The book explores how this dynamic changes the way people form opinions, encouraging quick alignment with the team rather than slow engagement with trade-offs, data, and context. It also highlights how moral frameworks can be used in ways that discourage inquiry, turning unanswered questions into settled dogma. The cost is not only mistaken beliefs, but a loss of the skills required to coexist with difference. The discussion pushes readers to notice their own incentives, when it feels safer to repeat a slogan than to admit uncertainty, when it is easier to condemn than to understand, and when an argument is evaluated by who said it rather than what it claims. By diagnosing certainty as both emotional comfort and cultural currency, the book frames humility as a civic virtue worth rebuilding. Secondly, discourse under pressure, social media, outrage, and incentive systems. Williams analyzes how the architecture of modern communication favors conflict and simplification. Social media platforms reward content that triggers strong emotion, spreads quickly, and sorts people into tribes. In that environment, the most visible voices are often those most willing to generalize, moralize, or escalate. The book shows how this incentive system can shape journalists, commentators, academics, and ordinary users alike, pushing them toward hot takes and away from careful interpretation. It also considers the emotional logic of outrage. Anger can feel clarifying, and public shaming can provide a sense of collective action, even when it reduces complex disputes to a single villain and a single virtuous position. Williams connects these patterns to a shrinking space for good faith disagreement, where a mistake, clumsy phrasing, or unpopular question can be treated as evidence of malice. The result is a public sphere that prizes visibility over accuracy and conformity over accuracy and conformity over exploration. By focusing on incentives rather than only intentions, the book helps readers see why even well-meaning people may contribute to the very discourse they dislike. Thirdly, identity, moral stakes, and the new tribalism. Another major theme is how identity has become a primary battlefield for legitimacy in public debate. Williams explores how political and cultural conflicts are frequently framed as contests between protected identities and suspected opponents, making disagreement feel existential. When arguments are tied tightly to identity, criticism can be interpreted as an attack on a person's dignity rather than a challenge to a claim. The book unpacks how this shift encourages policing of language, heightened sensitivity to symbolic harms, and suspicion toward heterodox views. It also examines the paradox of speaking in the name of marginalized groups while limiting the range of acceptable opinions within those groups. Williams is attentive to the reality of discrimination and historical injustice, while asking what happens when moral urgency becomes a blanket justification for intellectual closure. The analysis invites readers to separate empathy from dogma, to care about people without assuming a single ideological script is required to prove that care. By diagnosing tribalism as a response to fear, status competition, and moral ambition, the book argues that a healthier discourse requires treating individuals as more than representatives of a side. Fourthly, institutions, gatekeeping, and the chilling effect on inquiry. The book considers how institutions such as universities, media organizations, cultural venues, and professional workplaces have become arenas where speech norms are contested. Williams examines how formal rules and informal pressures can converge to create a chilling effect, where people avoid exploring contentious ideas because the social cost is unpredictable and potentially career-defining. Rather than portraying this only as censorship from above, the analysis emphasizes a broader ecology of gatekeeping, peer pressure, reputational risk, donor or advertiser sensitivities, and internal bureaucratic incentives. Williams also highlights how institutions may adopt simplified moral postures to protect themselves, choosing statements and policies that communicate virtue while discouraging debate about effectiveness. This section is useful because it frames the problem as structural as well as cultural. It asks readers to distinguish between accountability and punishment, between genuine harm and mere discomfort, and between norms that foster respectful discussion and norms that enforce ideological uniformity. The book suggests that institutions dedicated to learning and public understanding cannot thrive without protecting dissent, encouraging methodological rigor, and allowing people to change their minds without being permanently branded. Lastly, rebuilding conversation, curiosity, proportionality, and democratic resilience, Williams ultimately points toward repair, not resignation. He stresses habits that make disagreement productive: curiosity about opposing views, willingness to define terms, patience with ambiguity, and proportional responses to errors. The book suggests that many conflicts intensify because participants assume the worst motives, skip listening, and treat every dispute as a test of moral worth. Rebuilding discourse therefore requires new defaults, such as asking clarifying questions, acknowledging uncertainty, and separating intent from impact without erasing either. It also means creating room for private disagreement and gradual learning so that people are not forced to perform instant correctness in public. Williams frames these practices as essential to democratic resilience, because pluralistic societies depend on persuasion, compromise, and shared standards for evidence. He also implies that resisting the lure of certainty is a personal discipline, reading widely, seeking charitable interpretations, and tolerating the discomfort of unresolved questions. The message is that better discourse is not only a policy issue, but a daily practice. By emphasizing proportionality and genuine engagement, the book offers a path away from constant escalation and toward conversations that can actually change minds. In conclusion, this book is best suited for readers who feel exhausted by culture war dynamics yet still care deeply about fairness, truth, and democratic coexistence. Journalists, educators, students, and professionals in institutions where speech norms are contested will find especially relevant insights. But it also speaks to anyone navigating friendships and workplaces shaped by political tension. The benefit is practical as well as intellectual. By clarifying how certainty, outrage, and tribal belonging alter our reasoning, the book helps readers recognize when they are being pulled into performative conflict. That awareness can improve everyday life, reducing stress, sharpening critical thinking, and enabling more honest relationships built on curiosity rather than fear. Compared with many similar titles that either dismiss concerns about harm or treat dissent as inherently suspect, Williams aims for a more balanced diagnosis of incentives, identity, and institutional behavior. The writing approach, grounded in cultural criticism rather than partisan scorekeeping, makes the argument accessible while still challenging. For readers looking to understand why conversation feels broken and what personal and civic habits could help restore it, the book offers a compelling case and a thoughtful framework worth owning and revisiting. If you would like to support Thomas Chatterton Williams, you can buy the book through the Amazon link I've provided in the podcast description. After reading the book, please let me know what you think and share your thoughts. See you around.